Hi, I'm Oliver-Age24 and you're watching Game Dev Corner. Subscribe for regular videos about making and marketing indie games. For this week's video, I wanted to take a look at Chucklefish's new game, Wargroove. It's a turn-based strategy game where you wage war against battling factions. It's really reminiscent of both the Advance Wars and Fire Emblem series, but with some unique twists and iteration. It also comes bundled with a map editor, a cutscene editor and a campaign builder, so that the community can keep creating fresh new content to expand the lifespan of the game. The game was released on the 1st of February this year, 2019, and within 3 days it had already broken even and started to become profitable. It's currently topping the charts across Steam, Nintendo Switch, Xbox and PlayStation. On Metacritic it's currently sitting at 87 out of 100 and it's been given a few awards, including the #1 Best Switch Game of 2019. On Steam it's got a review score of 83%, very positive. So, by all accounts, the game has been a huge success. My friend Rodrigo, or Rodders, is the technical director at Chucklefish, a programmer on Wargroove and the creator of the game engine that it runs on, Halley. I asked Rodders if I could send him some questions about the development, marketing and success of Wargroove to see if there are any lessons that we could learn from their approach. Fortunately, he agreed, so I'm going to be talking about the questions I asked, why I asked them, and the answers that he gave. Firstly, I asked him about his choice to use his own game engine instead of one of the more predominantly used ones in indie pixel art games, such as Unity or Game Maker. He said that the primary advantage was that it allowed him to tailor the engine to the specific needs of the game. This meant that he could optimize the engine based on what was most needed and relevant for the game, in terms of both productivity and performance. In my own experience, I've sometimes hit walls where something that I wanted to do was slightly different to the intended use case. In those situations, I've had to creatively work around the limitations and do something hacky to do what I wanted it to do. Rodders said that using his own engine meant that fewer hacks and workarounds were necessary because he could just modify the engine itself. Other advantages that he gave are that he could fully customize the pipeline to the skills and needs of the team. And by having ownership of a larger fraction of the code stack, it meant that there were fewer issues that were out of his control. I also asked about the disadvantages to using your own engine. As you can probably imagine, he said that creating an engine is a lot of extra work. In particular, when it comes to porting your games to multiple consoles. Wargroove launched simultaneously across PC, Nintendo Switch, Xbox and PlayStation, so that's obviously a lot of extra work when you've coded the engine yourself. He also said that the onboarding process for new team members was slightly more difficult than it would have been if they'd used a more widely used game engine that people are familiar with. Luckily though, he was really pleased that the coders and artists picked it up quite quickly. Next, I asked about how they balance inspiration and iteration when it comes to the game's influences. There's a difference between paying homage and cloning a game, so I was really interested to hear his take on how to stay on the positive side of that line. Rodders said that Advance Wars provided the motivation and general ideas of what they wanted to go for, but they wanted to make a game inspired by it and not a clone. To that end, they were never afraid to innovate or experiment. While they were taking a critical look at Advance Wars, they noticed a few shortcomings with the design. There were issues with PvP balance and grindy stalemates. So it became an explicit goal for the Wargroove team that their game would not suffer from the same issues. They took inspiration in the form of the core mechanics and light-hearted spirit. but they had their own original design when it came to the world setting and the old and new mechanics. Some of these included commanders, their approach to capturing buildings, and their non-random critical hits. I've noticed that more and more indie studios are using early access to release their games unfinished, with the intent of building upon them with community feedback. Another major advantage of early access is that it helps provide financial validation of the game, and it helps raise funds for the rest of development. Rod has said that Starbound had followed a similar approach, and that it had been successful for that game. With Wargroove, however, they decided really early on that they wouldn't use crowdfunding or early access for this title. He said that they had a much clearer vision on what the completed game would look like, and they were in the lucky position to be entirely self-funded. This meant that they were under no external pressure to release the game as soon as possible, or to validate the market. He also made the observation that you only get one launch for a game, the first time that it's publicly available. So they wanted that version to be a version they were proud of rather than something that was unfinished. The downside to this approach is that you don't really know how well the game will sell until it's released. I asked Rodders if they just followed their instincts on what they thought would make a good game, or if there were any other forms of validation that they did. He said that they started out by making a game that they themselves would want to play. They also knew that there was an appetite among the gaming community for a new game like this. He believes that one of Chucklefish's strengths is having a good understanding of what the gaming community is looking for at any given time. Their portfolio and track record definitely backs this up, with titles such as Stardew Valley, Starbound, the games that they've published, and their recently announced Witchbrook. Ironically though, they did receive early validation when some of the work in progress GIFs and screenshots that they posted on Twitter went viral. Rodders said that the posts exploded out of their control, which served as evidence that people really wanted this game. The reaction to the announcement in early 2017 that the game would be coming to Nintendo Switch further confirmed the game's appeal. Rodders made the really interesting point that even with positive indicators on social media, you never really know how well a game is going to do until launch. So they were really happy to see it receive such a positive response. I've been following the game throughout development, and I had a really strong feeling that it would do well. To me, the main appeal and hook of the game is the art style, the nostalgia, and the level of polish, rather than a particular feature set. I asked Rodders if this matched his observations, and whether it was an intentional, creative decision. He said that Chucklefish think a strong art style and a high level of polish are very important features in a game. They always ask themselves, how would Nintendo do this? He said that a game could be really strong mechanically, but without looking and feeling appealing, it's all wasted. On the other hand, he also said that charm alone is not enough, and that they spent a lot of time tweaking every single aspect of the mechanics and content. Players might come for the factors mentioned, but ultimately, strong mechanics and entertaining content will be required to leave the players satisfied. This very much backs up my own experience too. The overall quality, art, concept and packaging of a game is what will initially get you interested, but it's the mechanics and content that will keep you playing and win you over long term. Since Wargroove was a cross-platform release, I was curious as to whether any particular platform was instrumental to the game's success. Rodders said that it's fair to say the game really blew up in popularity after the announcement at Nintendo Direct, which makes sense considering the game's inspirations. He said that Nintendo have been extremely supportive of the game and gave it lots of promotion, but also so have the other partners, especially Microsoft, so it's really hard to say how much of the game's success was due to a particular partner. Although Chucklefish has had many successful games, they haven't really scaled up, and they're still a relatively small studio. I asked Rodders how large the team for Wargroove had been, and whether he thought the team size had an impact on the quality of the game. He said that the project started with 4 full-time members, but it fluctuated up and down. At its peak, almost all 17 people in the company were doing some work on it. He said that he didn't think a bigger team would have meant that the game would have come out any earlier. Instead, it might have affected the scope of some features and content. He added that he thinks they might possibly have had the optimal team size for the game. He speculated that a bigger team size would have meant the game felt a lot less personal, and that individual members may have felt less creatively fulfilled. Next, I wondered how much the success of Chucklefish's previous titles contributed to the visibility and success of Wargroove. I was curious how much audience overlap they had between their games, or if Wargroove had found a new audience. Rodders said that Chucklefish has a particular brand of charming pixel art games, a lot of them drawing from nostalgia and breathing new life into old genres. People who are interested in those things tend to naturally gravitate towards their games, and hopefully discover the others. He said that they did see a lot of people in the Starbound community were excited about the game solely based on the fact that they trusted the developers to make another game that they'd be interested in. I think this is a good example of why it's important to really define your vision, beliefs and strengths as a developer so you can carry it through each of your games. Next, I was curious if there was one specific event or activity that was instrumental in the huge awareness surrounding the game. Rodders said that the Nintendo Direct at the Switch's launch was definitely the biggest beat, but that they also had a lot of great coverage and consumer feedback from events such as EGX, EGX Rezzed, and events promoted by Idea Xbox. I wondered how Chucklefish approached gathering player feedback. I was also curious how much the game changed based on this feedback, and their approach to internal and external playtests. Rodders confirmed that a large portion of developing a turn-based strategy game was playtesting. They playtested the game a lot themselves, but also had friends visit the office to try it out. They also recruited veterans of the genre online for a closed beta testing group. He said that the feedback proved invaluable and a lot of the unit balancing changed as a result. They also made a lot of changes to the UI and interactions within the game. In my experience, developing a game without player feedback means that you'll be relying on your assumptions of how players will play your game, rather than how they will actually experience it. It's easy to see why it's so valuable to get direct feedback from the players themselves to help shape the game. Finally, I was curious as to what was next for the Wargroove team. Rodders confirmed that they'd be working on patches addressing the biggest feedback points from the community. They'll also be continuing support for the game for the foreseeable future, based on more of the community's feedback. And they have a backlog of features that they'd like to add themselves. I hope you found this video interesting. I know that I got a lot myself out of Rodders' answers. Hopefully you did too. I really appreciate him taking the time to answer my questions. And also, I apologise for calling him Rodders in a professional video. The bits that stood out to me were that it's a great strategy to wear your influences on your sleeve, but not to be afraid to iterate and experiment on top of them. If you make something that you yourself would love to play, chances are that other people would love to play it as well. It also re-emphasised the importance of art style and presentation, confirming that at the end of the day, the most important part of a game is the player experience. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe and turn on notifications to find out about the next one. If you have any questions or your own advice, or you just want to talk about anything mentioned in this video, leave a comment below. Thanks for watching. Bye!
I am potato, I am potato, I am potato. Jesus, you're malicious. I am potato, I am potato, I am potato.